I need help solving a mystery. Ever since I was a kid, anytime they were speaking about slavery or anything like that, I always wondered, where the fuck were the Hispanics at? Which bathroom did we use? Like, why is there never anything about Hispanic people during slave times? Like, I just can't, like, I know I'm not, like, white enough, but I'm not quite black enough either. So, like, where did I land on the spectrum? Because every history teacher I've ever asked, or anyone that's just like a history buff, or if a conversation is ever brought up about slavery, and I ask the question, where were Hispanics? No one ever has the fucking answer. And it has boggled my mind for so long, still to this day, 2025, I don't know the fucking answer. And I need someone to just tell me where we belonged. If you know, please let me know. Where the fuck were the Hispanics at? Which bathroom did we use?
My paternal grandfather's side has been in Texas since before Texas was Texas, so I can speak on this, and I'm super excited to because I never have a reason to. So on my paternal grandfather's side, they actually did fight in the war between the United States and Texas. They were Tejanos, so they were some of the original people that were here, and they consider themselves Tejanos. Now, when the war was coming around, they told all the Tejanos, they said, if you fight for us, we're going to give you land, which was great. They were like, heck yeah, we're going to fight, we're going to win, and we're going to get some land. War was over. My great-great-grandfather did get land. He got a ton of land. The only problem was that the settlers that were coming in were very mistrustful of the Mexican people or the Tejanos. They were like, I don't like these tan people speaking this funny language. We're going to take their land. So sure enough, they took his land back. When the Tejanos who fought in the war got their land taken away, a lot of them went to Mexico. I mean, rightfully so. I'd be bitter too. But my great-great-grandfather decided to stay. I genuinely feel terrible that I know I'm not putting the right amount of greats in front of his name. Anyways, land is stolen. He's probably all messed up from the war. He decides to just start working on a farm. My paternal grandfather's side, they have genuinely been working the fields since the war happened. The stories are super duper messed up. We're not going to get into them, but what I will tell you is my grandma came here when she was 6. My grandpa couldn't go to school because he's been working on the farm since he was born, and I think that they were like the second generation on that same parcel of land. My grandma could go to school, and she was considered colored, so she did go to school with African Americans. If you have any other questions on this, I would be thrilled to get you answers.
Where the fuck were the Hispanics at? Which bathroom did we use?
My paternal grandfather's side has been in Texas since before Texas was Texas, so I can speak on this, and I'm super excited to because I never have a reason to. So on my paternal grandfather's side, they actually did fight in the war between the United States and Texas. They were Tejanos, so they were some of the original people that were here, and they consider themselves Tejanos. Now, when the war was coming around, they told all the Tejanos, they said, if you fight for us, we're going to give you land, which was great. They were like, heck yeah, we're going to fight, we're going to win, and we're going to get some land. War was over. My great-great-grandfather did get land. He got a ton of land. The only problem was that the settlers that were coming in were very mistrustful of the Mexican people or the Tejanos. They were like, I don't like these tan people speaking this funny language. We're going to take their land. So sure enough, they took his land back. When the Tejanos who fought in the war got their land taken away, a lot of them went to Mexico. I mean, rightfully so. I'd be bitter too. But my great-great-grandfather decided to stay. I genuinely feel terrible that I know I'm not putting the right amount of greats in front of his name. Anyways, land is stolen. He's probably all messed up from the war. He decides to just start working on a farm. My paternal grandfather's side, they have genuinely been working the fields since the war happened. The stories are super duper messed up. We're not going to get into them, but what I will tell you is my grandma came here when she was 6. My grandpa couldn't go to school because he's been working on the farm since he was born, and I think that they were like the second generation on that same parcel of land. My grandma could go to school, and she was considered colored, so she did go to school with African Americans. If you have any other questions on this, I would be thrilled to get you answers.
I need help solving a mystery. Ever since I was a kid, anytime they were speaking of...
Hello, Miss Lady. To answer your question, Hispanics were in Mexico. They only brought Hispanics here to take jobs from...
When I was a kid, anytime they were speaking about slavery or anything like that, I always...
If there is one thing that right now is making a majority of all these other communities get to be shocked, is the stand of black people right now. Black people just want accountability. They don't want you playing games with them. Black people are not playing you all. Black people are now serious. Trust me. There's this issue that has been there. Latinos trying to ask black people to go to, protest to them and go out there for them and protest to them because, what ICE Rates was trying to do to the Latino community, right? So this is what happened. Latinos came out and started asking support from black Americans. But all this is what happened. Black Americans just asked one question. You all have been choosing white people. You haven't been choosing black Americans, right? Right now, you want the black help. You want black people to come and help you. You want black people to come and support you. There is just one question that a critical Latino asked Latinos. Yeah, she's a Latino, is asking Latinos that you all are bagging black Americans with going to protest for you, with going to on the streets to help you protest against the ICE raids and everything that is happening. One question is, where were you during slavery? And trust me, that one question has sparked debates, has sparked people to talk about. Well, I like to give a disclaimer. You see, this video was a video that was done a long time ago, like it's a 1-year-old video. But this is the catch. This is why it's so important. Try to relate it with what's happening currently right now, still involving Latinos. They're still proving that they don't need black help. Look at what happened to Jasmine Crockett. Tells you all about who they choose or who they side with. And there's so much things that should be asked until this point, because you cannot need black support. When black people need you, you cannot support them. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to let you watch this video and then I'll be back. I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. As you know, I'm your host and presenter, Agent Stories. And if you're watching me for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership. I really get to see what I can offer you. But until then, let me see you on my next video.
I'm gonna try to make this make sense. I'm black. I have never been a slave, so I don't have no answers for you. Stop talking about the goddamn past, man.
Where the fuck were the Hispanics at?
I got tagged a bunch in this video, so I'm going to answer this question. Mexicans were legally white in the United States ever since 1848. I know that bothers so many of you because you're an ally and you don't want to be white or something like that, but that was the case. Mexicans were legally white, and that was because Mexicans were granted U.S. citizenship, and back then you had to be a free white person in order to be a U.S. citizen. So by default, Mexicans were automatically considered white, and that held up in court many years later. Well, then how come the natives were not considered white? That's because most natives were not considered Mexican. In order to be Mexican in 1848, you had to be Catholic. And the Comanches and the Apaches and all these other native groups, they were not Catholic, therefore they were not Mexican. And they were not Mexican, therefore they were not U.S. citizens or white. A lot of the activists are just first-generation Mexican Americans. Your family wasn't even here back then. That's why this stuff is confusing. But talk to Mexican Americans whose families have been here since the 1800s. They'll tell you that their birth certificates say white. And yes, there were some Mexican Americans, not many, who owned slaves, but there were many Mexican Americans who fought for the Confederacy, especially in Texas. People were just products of the times in which they lived.
Why is there never anything about Hispanic people during slave time? I'm not like white enough, but I'm not quite black enough either. So like, where did I land on the spectrum?
Hello, dear. Let's get into your history as a Hispanic person, since you wanted to know why Hispanics weren't included in history. The reason why you never saw signs that said Hispanics here, drink at this fountain, go to this bathroom, is because the word was not made up yet. It wasn't until later that Hispanics came into existence. But first, you need to realize that that's a prisoner of war term. These terms were used to categorize prisoners of war. Many of us don't realize that we are prisoners of war, and the titles that those who have us as prisoners of war gave us, we wear proudly like a badge. But it's basically for discriminatory practices and to segregate us, because it's just another derogatory term to say that you have so-called black blood in you. And it's all of these terms right here. All of these people are prisoners of war. And this is how they labeled us. So if you find yourself under any of these categories, you are a prisoner of war. And this is your prisoner of war title given to you by the colonizers, the enslavers, and those who have held us as prisoners of war. Let's first delve into the term Latino and where it came from. It came from the word Latino Americo, and so they called it Latino for short. There was a widespread usage of the term Hispanic that began around the 1970s because they wanted to be counted in as their own people. Let me explain. They were at one time counted as being white, or wherever the census was taken. And so, in order to have their own separate identity, this is where the term Hispanic came in. It was courtesy of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and MALDEF for short. Let's go deeper into your history, though. Let's take a look at the original people that were in South America and also in the Caribbean, in the different places where the Hispanics are today. Since Mexico is below the U.S., let's start there with Mexico, the Arawaks, and the Caribs, which are right below the United States. And as you can clearly see, the people who call themselves West Indian, the Arawaks were in the north and the Caribs were in the south. Take a look at the description of the Caribs. It says that they were tawny and they were dark brown in complexion. And the Arawaks, they were reddish brown. So they were all dark-skinned people, as you can see. And it also says the Mexican Indians. Now, notice they're all considered to be Indians, okay? It doesn't say Africans. It says Indians. And it says that they were a swarthy color and they were copper colored. So they were dark-skinned. The Mexicans were dark-skinned people. My skin complexion is copper colored. So they were about my skin complexion. And of course, this is prior to them being mixed with the European blood. Let's take a look at the description of the people from Peru, Brazil, Guyana, and Colombia. And again, you'll see here, the Peruvians were Indians, okay? So everyone in North and South America and the Caribbean, they were considered to be Indians. And they were copper colored as well. Just like those of us on the mainland in America, we're described as the American Indians and we're copper colored. So basically, pretty much everybody, mostly everyone in the Americas were copper colored people. And there were some variations. Some were reddish colored and some were darker, had darker hues. As you can see here, it says they were also darker copper colored. So imagine a penny that is old. Not a brand new shiny penny, which would be more copper colored. And so just think of one it's old and it's been circulated for a while. So between those two complexions, this is the skin complexion of the people. If you come down to the last paragraph, it talks about the people from Brazil. And then it also talks about the Mongols. So we know that those who are called Native Americans, the Mongolians, they were actually the first ones to come to the Americas with the copper colored. The brown, dark-skinned people were already here first, though. So some were mixed with the Mongols, which is why some Hispanics have a more Asian look to them. But it still says that they were brown in skin complexion and reddish brown if you read further in the second paragraph. So let's take a look at the Patagonians. And I don't know how to pronounce this, but right here, the P word and the A word. But it also says that these people who were also in the Caribbean, they were a reddish brown and darker than copper color. So these were very dark-skinned people. And it says that some were reddish brown, also copper color. We have all heard of how a lot of Mexicans want to reclaim part of the Americas, but they must first understand that, yes, they did come from their ancestors, but their ancestors look like me. And I know a lot of Hispanics don't want to admit that. So what can I say? But clearly, as it states here, the Aboriginals of the Upper California area, which is above Mexico, here's the description of what those people look like. It says, though there were different variations of the different tribes that were there, they all pretty much looked the same, like copper colored and darker skin. Okay. And then they said there were American Negroes that were actually dumped there, which is not the exact same people as the American Indians. Those are two completely different people. And the people around Colombia, they also match the same complexion and physical appearance of those who were in North America, the North American tribes, which are the copper-colored people and brown-skinned people. You asked, where do the mulattoes fit in? Again, the mulattoes came about because of the interracial rape. And all of this information is coming from this book. Hispanics came about because of the intentional crossbreeding with the slaves in order for various skin complexions to be created. Why were all these different skin complexions necessary to create? It's to keep the slaves in submission, because they further used it to pit them against each other according to their skin complexion and other differences as well. But we're focusing on skin complexion right now of the mulattoes. So in this Willie Lynch letter, it's clearly stating to pit the dark skin against the light and the light against the dark. which is why a lot of people are so brainwashed today and hate people according to the color of their skin, not really realizing that all of you are hated. But this was a tool to keep them in subjection and to keep them dependent upon the slave master and respecting the slave master, but disrespecting one another, which unfortunately still plays out today. So now we get into the preferential treatment of the mulattoes, which mestizo, same thing. It means mixed. The mixed people, the mulattoes, they receive preferential treatment. Many of them were called house N-words. So while the dark-skinned people were out in the field, the mulattoes and the fair-skinned ones were inside. Not only that, some of them were allowed to buy themselves out of slavery, and if their fathers claimed them, they were granted freedom. And by the late 18th century, many of the mulattoes that were free and other mixed-race people, they began petitioning for legal rights. I showed you all that so you can clearly see true history and how it unfolded and how Hispanic people came about. Now, if you read this book by Diego de Landa, Yucatan Before and After the Conquest, you'll see that the Spaniards came down from Spain, and many of the other groups, the Portuguese, they went to South America. Columbus did as well. They took a lot of the women as slaves. They took them as concubines. They impregnated them. The indigenous women that look like me and Hispanic people are a result of that mixture. I go into great detail about the information that's in this book in my Slave Trade Told in Reverse 4-part series that's on my page. Or you can go to my YouTube channel. It'd probably be a lot easier to find that. The 4-part series on how the slave trade was told in reverse. And I hope this helps to answer some of your questions there.
I need help solving a mystery.
The reason why you can't find Hispanics during slavery or Jim Crow is because Hispanic wasn't a word during those times. See, the word Hispanic started being used in the 1970s. See, at that time, we were legally classified as white, and on the census, we were marked down as white. This was a problem because they couldn't distinguish us as brown people from the white population on paper. Our funds for our communities, schools, things like that were being pushed into white neighborhoods, white schools, white communities, while removing resources and funding from brown communities. So the organization LULAC petitioned to have us separated on the census and giving us a separate category called Hispanic, meaning of Spanish-speaking origin. That way they could start tracking how brown communities were being defunded and how brown communities weren't being given resources. And later on in the late 80s and 90s, people started moving away from the term Hispanic and started going more towards the term Latino. Now, Hispanic comes from the word Hispano, which is what Spaniards on the northern side of the border were called in the United States. On the southern side of the border, those Spaniards were called Criollos, Spaniards born here in the Americas. During that time, people like me and you, who are brown presenting, were called mestizos, which is a eugenics concept, and there's really no such thing as a mixed person or a full-blooded person, because race is not biological, it's a social construct, and you can't be a half of a social construct or 3/4 of a social construct. It's not how that works. Anyway, detribalized natives, which we are, we're indigenous people, were called mestizos under Mexican control. But then when the U.S. took control, they called us Mexicans. So where were all those brown people during slavery? They were enslaved too. See, what history fails to tell you is that indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere were mass enslaved and suffered through chattel slavery. And not only did they displace us and traffic us all over the Western Hemisphere, but they also trafficked us to Europe and to European colonies in Africa. We are also the descendants of slaves. And Jim Crow didn't only happen in the Southeast, but it also happened in the Southwest. And it happened very covertly up in the North. So yes, we had separate water fountains and separate bathrooms. We couldn't swim in the same pools as white kids. We couldn't sit in the same movie theaters, or we had to sit in the back up on the balcony. We also were forced to sit in the back of the bus and the back of trains. But that's a history that they suppress and never talk about. Because if you don't know what they're doing to indigenous people, and if you don't know that those brown people are indigenous people, they get to cover up their genocide of indigenous people. And that's how they steal our lands and our resources. Always reclassifying us as something else and always displacing us. It's how they maintain that indigenous people do not unify to come get our lands back. Imagine what it would be like if more people started waking up to their indigeneity and how powerful that could be in more ways than one.
I need help solving a mystery. Ever since I was a kid, anytime they were speaking about slavery or anything like that, I always wondered, where the fuck were the Hispanics at? Which bathroom did we use? Like, why is there never anything about Hispanic people during slave times? Like, I just can't, like, I know I'm not, like, white enough, but I'm not quite black enough either. So, like, where did I land on the spectrum? Because every history teacher I've ever asked, or anyone that's just like a history buff, or if a conversation is ever brought up about slavery, and I ask the question, where were Hispanics? No one ever has the fucking answer. And it has boggled my mind for so long, still to this day, 2025, I don't know the fucking answer. And I need someone to just tell me where we belonged. If you know, please let me know.
I just found a gap in history, and I'm trying to understand, where were the Asian and Hispanic kids during the segregation era? Like, when it was whites only and colors only and the black people were integrating into white schools, where were the other races of people at? Because when you look at the like history books, you only see black and white kids. Like, you see an all black school and an all white school, and that's how they talk about it in the history books. Like, this school's all white and this school's all black. And, you know, and I know they said colored, so you'd be like, oh, like everybody. But you never saw Asian kids at black schools. They weren't in the pictures. Or Spanish kids at black schools. So where did they go to school? And like, did they not care about integration? Like, when did they come into the equation and start integrating too? Like, why is that such a gap? Am I tripping? Maybe I'm skipping a part of it. I feel like learning history like my whole life, they've never talked about. They never talked about the integration of Asian Americans into white schools, or Spanish or Hispanic people into white schools. Like, they never talked about that. So I don't know. It's just a thought. I just crossed my mind right now, so I just thought I'd say it out loud. I just found a gap in history, and I'm trying to understand, where were the Asian and Hispanic kids during the segregation era? Like, when it was whites only and colors only and the black people were integrating into...
This creator comes up with an amazing point about the lack of history about segregation during the Jim Crow era of Hispanic and Latinx children. And I mean, the most we pretty much know about the desegregation cases is the Brown versus Board of Education. Nobody necessarily talked as Menez versus Westheimer. I believe that's how you pronounce that. But that was in California. In Texas specifically, there was a few court cases that went up, but the majority of that was just, what we're going to do, we're going to desegregate our schools. We're going to give Hispanics and Spanish people whiteness so we can desegregate our schools, and they still can't go to white schools, but the black kids can go there and they're considered white. A lot of school districts did that. To this day, that's why you have race, Caucasian, ethnicity, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, or other. Like, that is a thing because of Jim Crow. Honestly, it's traced back. That's how you can get skewed police statistics and everything else. And so in Texas, there was signs that was like whites only, no Spanish and Mexicans. Like, that was their race up until Jim Crow era, where those lines got a little bit blurred because of lining school districts for integration. So the Blackwell School here in I think is Marfa, Texas, is a great pinpoint of the segregation of Hispanics when it comes to the school system, as well as if you look at Longview, Mansfield, and Dallas, schools in San Antonio. Black and brown people in this state has had a complex history with segregation that in turn had an effect on how they interact with each other. And that's a whole different conversation of how older generations of black and brown people do not like each other because of racism implemented by white supremacy.
I just found found a gap in history, and I'm trying to understand where were the Asian and Hispanic kids during the segregation era, like when it was whites only and coloreds only.
Hi, political science major here. They were here. There is no gap. What you might be experiencing or might think is a gap is probably the lack of the vocalization of the stories, or the stories not being told all throughout textbooks. But for someone like me who went to college for this, it's right there. It's in the history books, and it was in some of my high school history books as well, to be fair to our government. Okay, I'm going to try to use three things to try to layer out why I think you may feel like there was a gap, or why it seems like that story is not being told or vocalized. The three things are population, location, and assimilation. I'm going to try as best as I can to use facts and not try to opine too much. All right. So the first one is population. So during the height of which, considered the civil rights era, supported by my background here, 85% of the population was white. 11% was black, less than 4% was Latino, less than 6% was for foreign born, and I'm presuming that remaining kind of like 0.00 some percent. Like in 1960, for example, I think 980,000 people identified as Asian. So that's a very small number. And I think we can conclude that with population, the larger population will have a bigger impact as far as their story being told, as far as their fight for freedom, right? So 11% of black people going through, not all 11, but you get my point, going through Jim Crow segregation and marching. That is obviously going to make the worldwide news. There's going to be more stories written about those marches in the history book. Okay. Now, if you compare that Latino population to now, this is probably why you're seeing this discrepancy. It doesn't make sense to you. The Latino population, I believe, is going to be more than almost 22% of the U.S. population. That is a huge jump. Okay. But during the 1960s, these fights were there, right? They or even before the 1960s, right? There are a number of, Latino fight for segregation, for desegregation, right? So you see Mexican Americans going through segregation in California schools, right? There were riots. There were things like the Zoot Suit riots in the 1940s, which was also in Los Angeles, California, which leads me to my next point, which is location. So here's the thing. America's makeup, how it is now and how we know it now, is a lot different from what it was back in the 1950s and 1960s in terms of location and demographics. Okay, so in America, a large part of what most people focused on and cared about, especially is the northern part of America and the South. But a lot of places where the Latino population, remember, we've established that they were small, they were located in the southwest part of America. Okay, and the fundamental difference between the southwest part of America's segregation versus the southern segregation, where a lot of black African-American people were, is they didn't have these laws coded. They didn't have these segregation laws coded. They didn't have these English-only laws coded, unlike the Deep South, in which they had these segregation laws, Jim Crow laws, most of the time, not all the time, coded. Okay, so that's kind of the first problem. The second thing is, again, how much attention was paid to the western portion of America. Like, California now to have, a large number of electoral votes, right? It to be immensely populated. It to be a integral part to America now. The New Mexicos and whatever of the world. It didn't used to always be like that. So it was easier for what was going on in the western part of America to, either not be documented, to either not be looked at with, analyzed with deep lenses. But as you can see here, for context, there are documented, lawsuits of Mexican American parents suing Orange County, California school districts on behalf of their children and 5,000 other children of Mexican and Latin descent, arguing that the segregation, even though it was not coded in the law, was violating their constitutional rights. So these things existed. It was there. It happened. Okay. So, like, for context, if you go to learningforjustice.org, you'll see some of just documented history of the fight by Mexican, Hispanic population from the 60s on, things like the Latino high school walkouts, and you'll see it. It's there. You can even go back as early as the 1910s and see, what the Hispanic population was doing. And then there are also stuff about the Asian population, but again, it was different. When we talk about the Chinese with the gold rush, that's a little more complex. And I just want to keep this as simple as possible, right? It's there. It's right there. There was a Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund that pursued protection of civil rights of Mexican Americans. It's there. Okay, that's just my main point. Now, my final point is more of kind of an opinion or conclusion / inference that I've drawn, and which is the concept of assimilation. I think that unlike Black Americans, I think that there is an easier path to assimilation for Hispanic Americans and sometimes Asian Americans in the United States, but particularly with Hispanic Americans, to be able to assimilate into whiteness, right? And I think that because of that, year over year assimilation, even though some people may still identify as Hispanic, I think that there is less incentive to, regurgitate and or keep putting the story of Americans' treatment of their forefathers to the forefront. This part is mostly opinion. And I think that unlike, a lot of African-American brothers and sisters who have, grandparents and great-grandparents telling them the stories of what they went through the Deep South, and they are still seeing kind of, I guess, the consequences of that, and they're still seeing some of that similar treatment in America today. It's harder for Black people to assimilate with whiteness, unless, again, you're biracial and then you marry a white person, and that type of conversation, which is for another day. It's, I think, much easier for an Hispanic American who is not Afro, Latino, to assimilate. And the easier you can assimilate, the easier you are to probably forgive your government, to not, to let bygones be bygones. So I hope I explained this well. I do vividly remembering my high school history books having some of these stories. I don't think it was as detailed as stuff that I learned in college. But if you most definitely just type in Latino segregation era, a lot of this stuff will pop up. All right.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I'm hoping that you are doing great from wherever you're watching this video from. As you know, I'm your host and presenter Agentic Stories. Let's have a talk in regards to this. Now, after this woman asked this question, she's a Latino. After asking this question, majority of Latinos came saying that, our ancestors helped you fight. Our ancestors helped you fight during slavery. Our ancestors helped you fight during colonization. And this is what happened. Black Americans are saying they don't care. They don't care if your ancestors helped their ancestors. What's happening right now is what that really matters. What's happening right now is that you people are not supporting the cause. You people are not supporting what will help you. And you'd rather help a white person than to help a black person. But when you succumb to a problem, the first person that you'll run to, it will be a black person. Majority of the time, this happens. And black people right now, they don't want to play games. Black people just calling you out the way you are. And for the longest time, I know the relationship between Black Americans and the Hispanic community has had some, rough paths that they had to follow. There have been instances of betrayal so many times. Even look at when the Latinos chose to vote for Mr. Donald Trump. Trust me, Black Americans won them so many times. Black Americans tried to tell them about how and the consequences of all these things, but they didn't listen. They didn't care about how this was going to be affecting them, right? But you understand and you see that the reality comes out and they find themselves in a predicament that first they were warned about, right? They were warned about. Right now, they've decided to betray Jasmine Crockett. They've chosen another person who is a white person. So many times, and it has proven so many times that at what time, because Black Americans are asking, at what time did Latinos ever supported black Americans? At what time in history? They want to know and they want answers. And I think from the video, you have seen people trying to explain how their great grandparents did this to black people, how so and so did this to so and so many things that are happening, right? But I want to say that black Americans had their own struggles during slavery. Hispanics had their own lives. There's this part of history that explains that Hispanic people also had their own slaves back in Latin America. So somebody is saying that they were so happy to have a white on their birth certificate that when realization crept upon them, we were already motivated, revolutionized, activated, and making changes that they enjoyed, but now lost with their vote to be white again. So forget why we look at what you've done to yourself. Now you are white here. That's the question. Because you understand that so many times we have seen, okay, I mean, not all of Hispanics, of course, because generalization is not a good thing, but majority of these Hispanics, we have seen them siding so much. They wanted so much to be accepted with white people. And so you see there's an act of validation that they need from the white community because they want to be white so much. And so this prompts them to, betray black people in as much as black Americans are trying to give them their trust, right? So somebody's asking this question. So where were the Mexican people throughout the civil rights move? Where were they after that and before now? And why did leaders of Mexico want to be classified as white? And the majority went along with that. I wish they would focus on their gaps in history and allow black Americans to learn about theirs. I do not understand why Hispanics, Africans, especially Mexicans and Cubans, are tripping. Before now, black Americans did fit into their culture. Black Americans had no culture, quotes in quotes. None of the groups inserted their cultures onto black Americans. They weren't good enough due to their skin color and didn't hold up to their moral standards and values. No one group embraced black Americans. Now is not the time. Now is the time to realize that we've been lied to and not educated, but indoctrinated to believe and agree in the lies that we were told. See what happens. So that's all that happens. And you get to see how these people are. Right. Somebody said that people forget Spain is an OG colonizer. The reason why so many countries speak Spanish is because Spain was successful. Your race is what determines your place. Race is determined by phenotype. You are treated by how you are perceived. The Chinese Act ended in 1943. Somebody saying that I got a question for Mexican, Venezuelan, Asian, Native Americans, all other people that's not black. What did black people ever done to you throughout the history to have so much hatred towards us? A critical question, right? Somebody's also asking, they simply want their beloved. I lived through Jim Crow and they weren't here in any large numbers. What's in Los Angeles was still 60% plus. In the 60s, beloved, you all want their sweetie. They just were not around. I never saw any, and I was in the South and the Northeast. They claim a lot of things, but they weren't here like that. MLK Jr. worked with Cesar Chavez to show him how to protest for the rights of farm workers. They didn't know how to organize or fight. We have been fighting here for a long time. So please let me know what you think about this, right? I just want to know what you think and feel about this video. I'm your host and presenter Hispanic Stories, but until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salud.